When Brenda torched my cornfield, she walked straight into the trap I'd been setting for 6 weeks. The smell of burning corn filled the night air. 3 acres of corn, my 2 daughters' college tuition money, turning to ash. Brenda Hartwell stood by the fence line with that smug smile, still clutching the gas can like she'd just finished her masterpiece. "Farming is so outdated," she giggled into her phone, live streaming to her Facebook friends. "This neighborhood deserves something better." Then the sirens started wailing, getting closer, getting louder. Brenda's smile vanished when she realized those fire trucks weren't heading somewhere else. Because what this psycho didn't know, I'd been expecting her to pull exactly this stunt. What would you do if your HOA neighbor burned down your kid's future for Facebook likes? Tell me where you're watching from. Let me back up and tell you how this whole nightmare started. My name's Charlie Fieldstone, and I'm a 3rd-generation corn farmer on 8 acres in rural Ohio. My grandfather bought this land back in 1953 for $300 and a handshake. Back then, it was nothing but cornfields far as you could see. Fast forward 70 years, and I'm surrounded by McMansions with names like Whispering Oaks Estates. The irony? Not a single oak tree left. And the only heritage around here is my family's farm that these people treat like dog crap on their designer shoes. My wife Denise teaches 3rd grade. Twin daughters, Sarah and Emma, both 18 and college-bound. Sarah wants to be a vet, Emma's going for engineering. College costs $30,000 each. You know what pays for that? My corn harvest. Every damn kernel. The sweet smell of corn tassels in late summer used to be my favorite thing. Now it just reminds me of everything I almost lost to one psychotic real estate agent. Enter Brenda Hartwell, 48, HOA president and part-time house flipper. She moved into the biggest McMansion 3 years ago, vinyl siding, fake shutters, garage bigger than my barn. Her backyard butts against my property line, separated by my grandfather's weathered oak fence. Last spring, she shows up at my door with a clipboard and that dead-eyed realtor smile. "Hi, neighbor." "We've had complaints about your farm equipment being visible from the street." I looked at my 1960 John Deere sitting exactly where it belonged. "Lady, that tractor's been there longer than your whole subdivision." The smile turned predatory. "Several residents say it's killing property values. My clients are concerned about the rural aesthetic. Here's the kicker: my farm predates their HOA by 40 years. I'm not even in their jurisdiction. But try explaining that to someone whose biggest crisis is mismatched mailboxes." "This is a working farm," I said. "The equipment stays." "Mr. Fieldstone." Her voice went ice cold. "Being a good neighbor means considering how your choices affect others. I'd hate for this to become unpleasant." That's when my rooster Hannibal decided to crow right on cue. The sound of gravel crunching under her heels as she stormed off should have been my first warning. But the real gut punch came 2 days later. I'm out checking irrigation lines when I hear voices by the fence. Brenda's there with some slick guy in a $1,000 suit, pointing at my cornfield like she's already planning the street names. 8 acres, perfect for luxury townhomes, she's saying. "The farming situation is temporary." The suit nods, taking notes. "Timeline for vacant possession?" 6 months max. These old farmers always cave when you apply the right pressure." My blood turned to ice water. This wasn't about property values or community standards. This was about commission checks and development deals. She was already selling my land that wasn't even for sale. I ducked behind my grandfather's old tool shed, heart pounding like I was back in Afghanistan. The rough bark of that century-old oak tree felt solid under my palm, but everything else suddenly felt fragile. That night, I called Jake Thornfield, agricultural lawyer and old Army buddy. "Jake, hypothetically, what happens if someone tries to harass a farmer off his land for development?" "Nothing hypothetical about it, Marcus. Happens all the time. Document everything." "And Marcus? Watch your 6. As I hung up, Denise came out with 2 beers. "Everything okay?" I looked across my land corn stalks rustling in the evening breeze, same sound my grandfather heard every summer. "Honey, I think we're about to find out just how far people will go for money." The next morning, I found my irrigation hose had been slashed in 3 places. Game on, Brenda. 3 slashed irrigation hoses might not sound like much, but when you're feeding 30,000 corn plants during the hottest week of July, it's basically economic warfare. I spent my morning splicing rubber in 100-degree heat, the metallic taste of anger coating my tongue. I didn't have to wait long for round two. Tuesday afternoon, I'm checking corn stalks when this White County truck rumbles up my gravel drive. Fire Marshal Dave Peterson steps out, looking apologetic as hell, clipboard in hand like he's about to ruin my day. "Marcus, sorry to bother you, but I got a complaint about illegal agricultural burning on your property." "Illegal burning?" I wiped sweat off my forehead with a dirty sleeve. "Dave, you know I haven't burned anything since spring cleanup, and that was with proper permits." He shrugged, clearly not buying it either. "Someone filed a formal complaint, says you've been conducting unauthorized brush burning during drought conditions, even provided photos." My stomach dropped to my boots. "Photos of what?" Dave handed me a manila folder that felt like a loaded gun. Inside were pictures of smoke rising from what looked like my back 40, except that smoke was from Tom Henderson's controlled burn 3 miles away, shot from an angle that made it look like my property was on fire. "This is complete bullshit, Dave. That's not even my land in the background." "I know, Marcus. But rules are rules. I gotta investigate every complaint." His voice carried the exhaustion of a man who'd seen too many neighbor wars. "Mind if we take a look around?" 20 minutes later, Dave confirmed what we both knew. My fire safety protocols were military-grade perfect. Burn permits current, fire breaks maintained, water sources marked. He even complimented grandfather's old stone fire ring that I still used for brush disposal. Back in my Army days, I'd learned that when someone builds a paper trail against you, they're planning something bigger. Real estate agents, I remembered reading somewhere, can lose their licenses for making fraudulent claims about zoning changes. Brenda was walking a tightrope, and she didn't even know it. "Whoever filed this either doesn't know farming or they're setting you up for something," Dave said, climbing back in his truck. "Watch your 6, Marcus." That evening, I installed my first security camera, nothing fancy, just a trail cam pointed at the equipment shed. The soft click of the mounting bracket reminded me of setting up perimeter security overseas. Different enemy, same tactics. Wednesday morning brought the diesel message. The acrid smell hit me before I even saw the puddle around my fuel tank. Someone had dumped about a gallon of it in the sandy soil, not enough to damage anything, just enough to let me know they could get close whenever they wanted. I started researching Brenda's business practices that afternoon. The county assessor's website revealed what I suspected. She'd been promising buyers that agricultural zoning changes are anticipated, except no such changes were even being discussed. In Ohio, that kind of misrepresentation can cost you your real estate license permanently. Thursday brought the game changer I should have seen coming. I'm replacing fence boards when Harold Grayson shuffles over, glancing around like he's about to confess to murder. Harold's 75, retired postal worker, lived here since before Brenda's McMansion invasion. "Marcus, we need to talk." His voice barely carried over the evening breeze rustling through corn leaves. "What's up, Harold?" "That Hartwell woman came by yesterday asking about your schedule when you'd be away from the property." His weathered hands gripped the fence rail so tight his knuckles went white. "When I didn't bite, she offered me $500 cash for information about your safety violations." "Safety violations I don't have?" "Identity. Safety." That's when she suggested I might start noticing some. Harold's voice shook with disgust. "My late wife Helen used to love watching your grandfather work this land. Brenda's trying to destroy something beautiful for commission money." That's when Harold became my inside man. Turned out, Brenda had visited half the neighborhood with similar offers. Most told her to take a hike, but couples seemed interested in easy cash. By Friday, I had a war chest of evidence. Photos of the diesel vandalism, documentation of the false fire report, screenshots of Brenda's fraudulent property listings, and witness statements about attempted bribery. But my real counterpunch came from those misleading real estate listings still active on her website. I called the Ohio Division of Real Estate, armed with screenshots of every promise she couldn't deliver. "Ma'am, I'd like to file a complaint about fraudulent claims regarding agricultural zoning." The investigators' interest was immediate and intense. Apparently, Brenda wasn't the first agent they'd tracked for this particular scam. That weekend, I installed more cameras and researched agricultural protection laws. Harold stopped by Sunday with coffee and reconnaissance. "Brenda's having some kind of war council tonight." 4 cars showed up around 7. The sound of multiple engines in her driveway carried across the still evening air. Through my kitchen window, I watched shadows moving behind her curtains. "Let the games begin, Brenda. Your move." Monday morning brought Brenda's next chess move, and it was uglier than I expected. She'd formed the Neighborhood Safety Committee, basically a gang of bored suburbanites with clipboards and serious grudges against anything that didn't come from Home Depot. First up was Janet Kowalski, rolling up in a spotless white Lexus that probably cost more than my annual seed budget. She parked right at my property line and started photographing my barn like she was documenting war crimes. "Morning, Janet," I called out, walking over with my coffee. The bitter taste of day-old grounds matched my mood perfectly. "Something I can help you with?" She jumped like I'd caught her stealing chickens. "Oh, Marcus, I'm just documenting some safety concerns." Safety concerns? I looked at my perfectly maintained equipment shed. "About what exactly?" "Well," she fumbled with her phone, clearly reading from a script. "The proximity of your fuel storage to residential property, and the vermin attraction from your composting practices." I wanted to laugh, but the implications weren't funny. My fuel tank sat farther from her house than her own barbecue grill. My compost pile met every agricultural regulation in the book. "Janet, you've lived here, 6 months? My family's been following safety codes since before your subdivision existed." The guilty flush creeping up her neck told me everything. Brenda had fed her lines, and she was just a desperate actress trying to earn her $50. Over the next week, committee members took shifts harassing me. Tuesday brought Martin Cruz, documenting dust concerns while my corn swayed silently in the breeze. Wednesday was Susan Walsh, complaining about my rooster's morning calls, the same rooster that had been crowing here for 3 years before she moved in. By Friday, they were demanding I install expensive privacy fencing to hide my unsightly agricultural operations. The sweet smell of sawdust filled the air as I repaired actual fence damage Saturday morning. That's when Harold shuffled over with his typical nervous glances, carrying intelligence that would change everything. "Marcus, we need to talk." His voice barely carried over the rustling corn leaves. "Found out something about your committee friends." I set down my hammer. "I'm listening." Harold pulled out a folded newspaper clipping, his weathered hands shaking slightly. "Did some digging on those people. Martin Cruz? He's facing an insurance fraud lawsuit, allegedly staged property damage for payouts. Susan Walsh just lost her real estate license for forging inspection documents." My stomach dropped like a stone. "Brenda's recruiting criminals? Gets worse." Harold stepped closer, lowering his voice to barely a whisper. "Overheard her offering them $50 per documented violation they can report. She's buying false testimony. Now I understood the game. This wasn't neighborhood concern. It was organized fraud designed to build a legal case that would force me off my land. My daughter's college money, my grandfather's legacy, everything I'd worked for was under assault by paid liars." That afternoon, I dove into public records like my life depended on it, because it did. Amazing what you can find when you know where to look. Martin had 3 insurance claims in 2 years, all suspicious. Susan's license revocation mentioned pattern of document falsification. Even Janet's husband had bankruptcy and DUI issues. Brenda had assembled a crew of desperate people with flexible ethics, perfect soldiers for her fraud army. But she'd made one critical error. She'd underestimated Harold. See, Harold had watched this neighborhood transform from family farms to suburban sprawl. His late wife Helen used to sit on their porch every evening watching my grandfather work the fields. To Harold, my farm wasn't just agriculture. It was the last piece of something authentic in a world of vinyl siding and fake shutters. So when Harold offered to spy on committee meetings, I accepted immediately. "Wednesday night, 7 o'clock, he whispered during our Sunday fence conversation. Brenda mentioned bringing in professional documentation specialists. Wednesday evening, I watched cars gather at Brenda's house like vultures circling roadkill. Harold's beat-up Honda looked pathetic among the luxury SUVs, which made him the perfect inside man. An hour later, he knocked on my back door with news that made my blood freeze. "She hired a private investigator," Harold said, his voice shaking with anger. "Guy named Rick Paulson. They're planning to manufacture evidence-dead fish planted by your creek, fake chemical spills, recorded noise violations during legal working hours." The room started spinning. "When?" "Soon. Brenda's under pressure from her developer contacts. She promised them a timeline she can't meet." Harold gripped his beer bottle like a lifeline. "Marcus, they're talking about staging something big enough to trigger county intervention." That night, I installed military-grade surveillance. Infrared cameras, motion sensors, even dummy units to throw them off. The soft electronic hum of recording equipment became my lullaby. I also called Jake Thornfield. Jake, what's the penalty for conspiracy to file false government reports? Organized fraud, Marcus. Federal crime if it crosses certain thresholds. The next morning, fresh tire tracks scarred my cornfield where someone had driven through during the night. 20 plants destroyed, maybe more. Brenda's war was escalating. Time to fight back. Brenda's next move hit me where it hurt most, during peak irrigation season when my corn needed every drop to survive the August inferno. I was out checking sprinkler heads at dawn when Harold's panicked voice cut through the morning air. Marcus! County truck just pulled into Brenda's driveway. The crunch of dried corn husks under my boots sounded like breaking bones as I jogged toward the fence. My gut told me this wasn't a social call. 20 minutes later, Water Inspector Carol Hendricks knocked on my door holding a death warrant disguised as official paperwork. Sorry, Marcus. Got complaints about excessive water usage depleting the neighborhood supply. Your irrigation system needs immediate shutdown pending investigation. The words hit me like a physical blow. I stared at the cease and desist order, watching my daughter's college dreams evaporate in real time. Carol, my well's been here since 1953. Never affected anyone's water. I know this stinks, but look at these usage numbers. She handed me charts showing water consumption 3 times normal agricultural levels. According to this data, you're using enough water for a golf course. The numbers were pure fantasy. My grandfather's old well couldn't pump that volume if it ran 24/7. But someone had created official-looking documents that would fool a rushed inspection. Who filed the complaint? Anonymous tip. But Marcus. Carol glanced around nervously, lowering her voice. This feels orchestrated. Get your own usage test done fast. If these numbers are fabricated, someone's using county resources for a personal vendetta. As her truck disappeared down my gravel drive, I felt the metallic taste of real fear. Without irrigation, my corn would die within a week. 30,000 plants, $60,000 in lost revenue, Sarah and Emma's tuition money, gone. But then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. A 20-foot strip of corn along my eastern property line had turned brown overnight. Not drought-stressed yellow, but chemically burned brown. The sickly sweet smell of herbicide hung in the still air like poison gas. Someone had dumped industrial-strength weed killer on my crops, my trail camera. I'd positioned one to cover this exact section after last week's vandalism. Back at the house, my hands shook as I pulled up the footage, fast-forwarding through hours of darkness until 2:47 a.m., when she appeared like a suburban ghost. Brenda Hartwell, creeping along my fence line with a large spray bottle, methodically poisoning my corn plants. The infrared camera caught everything: her face, the herbicide container, even her license plate when she loaded the empty bottle into her Mercedes. She documented her own felony in crystal clear detail. 3 hours later, I was at Tractor Supply talking to my buddy Tom. Their parking lot security camera had captured Brenda purchasing 2 gallons of Roundup concentrate the previous evening. Cash transaction, but her face was unmistakable under the sodium lights. I had her cold on agricultural vandalism, criminal trespassing, and crop destruction. In Ohio, destroying someone's crops is a felony carrying up to 5 years in prison. But something told me this was just the opening salvo. That evening, Harold shuffled over with intelligence that explained Brenda's desperation. She's in deep trouble, he whispered, glancing around like enemy agents might be listening. Overheard her screaming at someone on the phone about development timelines. Apparently her broker contract has penalty clauses. What kind of penalties? $50,000 forfeiture if the land isn't available by October 1st, plus she loses the commission. Harold's weathered face looked haunted. Marcus, she's borrowed against that expected money. If this deal collapses, she faces bankruptcy. The pieces clicked into place like rifle rounds chambering. Brenda wasn't just harassing me, she was fighting for her financial survival. Public records showed her development deal with Midwest Corporation promised a $168,000 commission for delivering my 8 acres vacant and ready for development. She'd been spending money she didn't have, banking on stealing my land through fraud and intimidation. Now she was trapped between criminal prosecution and personal ruin. That night, I hired an independent hydrologist to test my actual water usage. Cost me $400 I couldn't spare, but the results were devastating to Brenda's case. My consumption was 40% below agricultural averages. The county data was complete fiction. I also upgraded my security system with heat-sensitive cameras and motion detectors. If Brenda wanted to escalate to arson or sabotage, I'd capture every criminal act in admissible detail. But the real revelation came when I researched agricultural protection laws online. Farmers have special legal protections against harassment campaigns designed to force land sales. Back in the 1980s, corporate developers used similar tactics against family farms until Congress passed the Agricultural Land Protection Act. The law was specifically designed to stop exactly what Brenda was doing. As I sat in my kitchen that night, watching sprinklers water perfect suburban lawns while my corn slowly died, I realized something important. Brenda had made a fatal error. She'd declared war on someone who understood both agriculture and military strategy. The sweet evening air carried the sound of her desperation, and I could almost smell her fear mixing with the herbicide residue. Time to show her what a real counterattack looked like. The bombshell that changed everything came on a Tuesday evening when Harold appeared at my fence line looking like he'd seen a ghost. His weathered hands gripped the rail so tight his knuckles had gone white. "Marcus, we need to talk. Now." His voice carried a tremor I'd never heard before. "What I discovered tonight, it changes everything." I dropped my wrench, the metallic clang echoing off the barn wall. Harold had never looked this shaken, not even when his wife passed last spring. What happened? Stayed after yesterday's committee meeting, hid in Brenda's garage when everyone left. Harold's breathing was shallow, rapid. "What I overheard, Jesus, Marcus. She's not trying to force you out for property values." My stomach dropped. "Then what?" "She's already got a development deal. $2.8 million for your 8 acres. The words hit me like physical blows. 32 luxury townhomes, starting at $400,000 each. The world tilted sideways. My grandfather's land, 3 generations of sweat and sacrifice, reduced to suburban sprawl for rich people who probably thought corn came from cans. That's impossible. This is agricultural land." "Not anymore. It isn't." Harold pulled out his ancient flip phone with shaking fingers. I recorded part of their conversation. You need to hear this. The audio was scratchy, but Brenda's voice cut through clear as a death sentence. "Jim, I guarantee vacant possession by October 1st. The agricultural situation is temporary. Farmers always cave under enough pressure. I've orchestrated this before." A gravelly male voice responded. "Brenda, if this timeline slips, we're talking $50,000 in penalty clauses. Plus you forfeit the commission. Can you absolutely deliver? Trust me. I've got county officials building harassment cases, neighbors documenting fake violations, and if necessary..." Her voice dropped to a whisper that made my skin crawl. "Well, farm accidents happen all the time." The recording ended, but the threat hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. Harold's face had gone pale as winter wheat. "Marcus, she's talking about hurting you." I felt that familiar combat alertness flooding my system, the hyper-awareness that kept soldiers alive when death was hunting them. "Harold, you just handed me evidence of criminal conspiracy and implied violence. This isn't harassment anymore, it's organized crime." "Gets worse." Harold's voice cracked. "She's borrowed against that commission money. Second mortgage, new Mercedes, paid for her daughter's wedding. If this deal collapses, she faces bankruptcy." Now I understood the escalation, the desperation, the increasingly dangerous tactics. Brenda wasn't just greedy, she was trapped. And cornered animals were the most lethal. But here's where 20 years of military strategy kicked in. When your enemy reveals their true objective, you don't just defend, you destroy their operational foundation. That night, I researched agricultural easements until my eyes burned from screen glare. Discovered that farmers can file conservation easements that legally protect land from development forever. The process takes 30 days, but once approved, the property becomes untouchable. Even better? The state pays substantial tax benefits to encourage agricultural preservation. Brenda's development dream could become legally impossible with the right paperwork. Dawn found me at the county courthouse with a stack of forms and a $500 filing fee. By noon, my 8 acres were officially protected under Ohio's Agricultural Land Preservation Program. Forever. The beauty of it? Even if Brenda somehow forced me to sell, no developer could touch the land. Her $2.8 million deal had just become worthless paper. But I kept this information locked down tight. Sometimes, the best weapon is the one your enemy doesn't see coming. Let Brenda keep escalating, keep committing crimes, keep building evidence of her own conspiracy. Because when this war reached its climax and Harold's recording guaranteed it would, I wanted her buried so deep she'd never threaten another farmer. The power dynamic had just shifted seismically in my favor. Time to let Brenda dig her own grave. The next morning, I called an emergency meeting in my kitchen with the only people I trusted completely. Coffee percolated in the background while I spread Harold's recorded evidence across my grandfather's oak table like battle plans. "All right, team," I said, looking at the faces around me. "Time to stop playing defense." Denise sat with her laptop open, legal research tabs filling the screen. Over the past month, she'd transformed from worried wife into full-time legal investigator, and frankly, she was better at it than most lawyers I knew. "I've been digging into agricultural protection laws all night. Marcus, what you filed yesterday was brilliant, but we need to go bigger." Harold perched nervously on the edge of his chair, still processing his role as our inside intelligence source. "Brenda's planning something for this weekend." Committee meeting got moved up, and she mentioned bringing in professional documentation services. Professional documentation services? I raised an eyebrow. That private investigator she hired, Rick Paulson. Apparently he specializes in manufacturing evidence for civil cases. Deputy Sheriff Rodriguez, my old army buddy, leaned back in his chair with that calculating look I remembered from Afghanistan. "Manufacturing evidence for civil cases is federal fraud, Marcus. If we can prove conspiracy, this becomes a RICO case. That's when I knew we had them." See, back in the 80s, Congress passed the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act specifically to target organized crime. Most people think RICO only applies to mob bosses, but it covers any pattern of coordinated illegal activity for financial gain. Brenda's harassment campaign, her hired committee, her paid investigator, that was textbook racketeering. "Here's what we're going to do," I said, pulling out a legal pad. "Jake Thornfield is driving down from Columbus this afternoon. He's handled 3 agricultural fraud cases this year, and one of them involved RICO charges." Denise looked up from her research. "I found precedent cases where developers use similar harassment tactics. In 2 instances, the farmers won civil judgments over $500,000. $500,000? Harold's eyes went wide. "Punitive damages for organized harassment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and tortious interference with business operations," Denise explained. "I'd married a school teacher, but somewhere along the way, she'd become a legal researcher who could quote case law like scripture. The real genius of our strategy came from combining multiple legal approaches: criminal charges through the sheriff's department, civil lawsuit through Jake, and regulatory complaints through 3 different state agencies. We'd hit Brenda from so many directions she wouldn't know which fire to fight first." "What about the agricultural easement?" Rodriguez asked. "That's our nuclear option," I grinned. "She doesn't know yet that her development deal is already dead. Let her keep committing crimes while chasing a payoff that no longer exists." Jake Thornfield arrived that afternoon looking like he'd stepped out of a John Grisham novel rumpled suit, briefcase held together with duct tape, and the predatory smile of a lawyer who smelled blood in the water. "Marcus, this is beautiful," he said, reviewing Harold's recording. "Criminal conspiracy, real estate fraud, agricultural harassment. I can file civil charges tomorrow and have her assets frozen pending investigation." "What about the development company?" "Oh, they're screwed too. Conspiracy to defraud a property owner, bribery of public officials, RICO violations if we can prove pattern and practice." Jake's eyes lit up like Christmas morning. "I've been waiting my whole career for a case this clean." That evening, we laid out our coordinated attack plan. Rodriguez would file criminal complaints with the state attorney general's office. Jake would initiate civil proceedings for damages and injunctive relief. Denise would submit regulatory complaints to the Real Estate Licensing Board, Water Management Department, and Agricultural Protection Agency. "What about evidence collection?" Harold asked. "Keep doing what you're doing," I told him, "but from now on, everything gets documented. I've got enough cameras around this property to film a Hollywood movie." The sweet smell of evening corn pollen drifted through the kitchen window as we finalized our strategy. It reminded me why this fight mattered, not just for my family's financial future, but for every farmer facing harassment from developers who saw agricultural land as nothing more than potential profit. Jake stood to leave, stuffing papers into his battered briefcase. "Marcus, Within 48 hours, Brenda Hartwell is going to discover that her little real estate scheme just became the worst decision of her life. "What's our timeline?" Denise asked. "Fast. Her development contract expires October 1st, which gives us 6 weeks to completely destroy her conspiracy." Jake's predatory smile returned. "By the time we're finished, she'll be lucky if she can get a job selling magazine subscriptions." As our war council disbanded, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: confidence. We had evidence, legal representation, criminal charges pending, and a coordinated strategy that would hit Brenda from multiple directions simultaneously. But most importantly, we had the moral high ground and the law on our side. Time to show this suburban Karen what happened when you declared war on the wrong farmer. Brenda's desperation reached a whole new level that weekend when she realized time was running out. Her development contract deadline was approaching fast, and she still had one major obstacle standing between her and that $168,000 commission: me. Saturday morning brought the first sign of how far she was willing to go. I walked out to start my combine harvester and immediately smelled something wrong. The sickly sweet scent of contaminated fuel. Someone had dumped about 5 pounds of sugar into my gas tank overnight. Now, here's something most people don't know. Sugar doesn't actually ruin engines the way movies suggest, but it does create a crystalline sludge that clogs fuel filters and makes equipment run like garbage. Whoever did this knew enough about sabotage to cause maximum inconvenience without triggering insurance fraud investigations. Thanks to my upgraded security system, I had crystal clear footage of Brenda creeping around my equipment shed at 3 a.m. with a bag of granulated sugar in a funnel. She'd even brought a flashlight, helpfully illuminating her face for the cameras. But the sugar trick was just the opening move. Sunday afternoon, I discovered my hydraulic lines had been cut on the corn picker, not severed completely, just nicked enough to cause slow leaks that would fail catastrophically under pressure. A farmer working alone could get seriously injured if hydraulic equipment failed unexpectedly. Tuesday brought the wheel bolt sabotage. Someone had loosened the lug nuts on my farm trailer just enough to create dangerous wobbling at highway speeds. If I'd been hauling corn to market and those wheels came off on Route 33, I could have killed someone. Each incident was documented in high-definition detail by my surveillance network. Brenda's face, her license plate, even audio of her muttering complaints about stubborn farmers while she committed felonies on my property. But the real escalation came Thursday when I caught her trying to steal my irrigation pump motor. The diesel engine that powered my water system was worth about $3,000, but more importantly, losing it during drought season would kill my entire crop within days. I'd been expecting this move thanks to Harold's intelligence network. He'd overheard Brenda telling her hired investigator that equipment theft would force the farmer to abandon the property for financial reasons. So when my motion sensors detected movement near the pump house at 2 a.m., I was ready. I slipped out the back door and crept through my cornfield, using techniques I'd learned during night patrols in Afghanistan. The rustling corn stalks covered any sound of my approach, and the new moon meant visibility was nearly zero. Brenda was there with a truck and trailer, attempting to disconnect my pump motor with the help of some guy I didn't recognize, probably her hired muscle. They'd brought bolt cutters and a come-along winch, clearly planning to steal the entire assembly. I pulled out my phone and started recording, capturing clear audio of their conversation. "Just cut the mounting bolts," Brenda whispered. "Once his irrigation fails, he'll have to sell within a week." "What if he has insurance?" the guy asked. "Equipment theft isn't covered under agricultural policies unless it's specifically listed. This pump wasn't valuable enough to itemize." "Wrong on both counts, lady. My insurance covered theft of any farm equipment over $500, and I'd specifically added the pump motor after last year's countywide theft spree. But I let them continue working for another 10 minutes, documenting their criminal conspiracy in admissible detail. Then I called Rodriguez. "Sheriff's Department, this is Deputy Rodriguez." "Mike, it's Marcus. Got 2 people actively stealing equipment from my property right now. I'm recording everything. Stay back, Marcus. We'll be there in 5 minutes." The sound of approaching sirens sent Brenda and her accomplice scrambling. They abandoned their tools and fled in the truck, but not before my cameras captured the license plate and both faces clearly. Rodriguez arrived with backup and collected the evidence: bolt cutters with Brenda's fingerprints, the winch system they'd abandoned, and tire tracks matching her vehicle. More importantly, my video footage showed premeditated theft of agricultural equipment, a felony in Ohio carrying up to 5 years in prison. But Brenda's biggest mistake was involving a hired accomplice. The guy turned out to be Rick Paulson, her private investigator, who had priors for fraud and was definitely not licensed for equipment recovery operations. "Marcus, this just became a federal case," Rodriguez explained while processing the scene. "Conspiracy to commit theft across state lines, organized fraud, maybe even RICO violations." Friday morning brought the news I'd been waiting for. Harold shuffled over with intelligence that made everything click into place. "Brenda's completely panicked," he whispered. "Overheard her screaming at someone on the phone about the development deadline. Apparently, if she doesn't deliver your land by October 1st, she owes the developers $50,000 in penalties." "How long until October 1st? Harold checked his calendar. 18 days. 18 days until Brenda faced financial ruin. 18 days of a cornered predator with nothing left to lose. The sharp smell of hydraulic fluid still lingered around my equipment, reminding me that this war was far from over. Brenda had crossed the line from harassment to violent sabotage. Time to finish this before someone got seriously hurt. With 18 days until financial catastrophe, Brenda Hartwell made the decision that would seal her fate forever. Harold's breathless report Tuesday evening confirmed my worst fears about how far desperate people will go. "She's lost it completely, Marcus." Harold gripped the fence rail, his knuckles white with tension. "Overheard her talking to that Paulson character about creating an accidental fire that would force immediate land sale." The blood in my veins turned to ice water. "Fire? During drought season?" "Gets worse. She's been researching volunteer fire department response times, wind patterns, everything. Plans to set it during next week's training exercise when most crews are occupied." I felt that familiar combat alertness flooding my system, the hyper-awareness that meant life-or-death decisions were coming fast. Brenda had escalated from harassment to vandalism to theft, and now she was planning arson. In drought conditions, a cornfield fire could spread to neighboring properties, maybe even threaten lives. When? Thursday night. She mentioned something about making it look like faulty electrical equipment and having an alibi at the city council meeting. That gave me 48 hours to prepare for what could be the final battle of this war. Wednesday morning, I drove to hardware stores in 3 different counties, paying cash for fire suppression equipment. Portable pumps, emergency water tanks, flame-retardant chemicals, everything I'd need to fight a fire until professional help arrived. The acrid smell of chemical suppressants filled my truck bed like a promise of survival. But my real preparation involved Fire Chief Danny Morrison, another Army veteran who understood the difference between legitimate emergencies and criminal acts. "Danny, hypothetically, if someone was planning to commit arson on my property, what kind of evidence would you need for criminal charges?" His weathered face went grim. "Video footage of the fire being set, accelerant residue, premeditation evidence. Why, Marcus? You expecting trouble? Let's just say I want to be prepared." That afternoon, I installed heat-sensitive cameras throughout my cornfield military-grade thermal imaging that would detect unusual heat signatures long before flames became visible. The cameras linked directly to both my phone and the fire department's emergency dispatch system. I also coordinated with Rodriguez to have patrol units standing by in the area Thursday evening, not close enough to spook Brenda, but ready for immediate response when the inevitable happened. Harold provided final intelligence Wednesday night. She bought accelerant this afternoon. 3 gallons of camping fuel from the outdoor store on Highway 33. Paid cash, wore sunglasses and a baseball cap, but I followed her. Did anyone else see this purchase? Store security cameras. I made sure to browse near the register when she checked out. Thursday evening arrived with oppressive humidity and dead calm, air-perfect conditions for controlled burning, terrible conditions for stopping a wildfire once it started. The sweet scent of ripening corn filled the air, reminding me what was at stake. I positioned myself in my grandfather's old hunting blind overlooking the back 40, armed with night vision binoculars and a direct radio link to dispatch. Every thermal camera was active, every heat sensor calibrated. If Brenda wanted to play with fire, I'd document every spark. At 11:47 p.m., my thermal cameras detected movement along the eastern property line. 2 heat signatures, one carrying what looked like containers, moving systematically through my corn rows. Brenda and Paulson, right on schedule. I watched through infrared as they poured accelerant along a 100-foot section of corn, creating a fire break designed to contain the blaze initially before letting it spread accidentally. Their conversation carried clearly in the still night air. "Remember, we were never here," Brenda whispered. "This needs to look like equipment malfunction." "What about insurance investigations?" Paulson asked, unscrewing another fuel container. "By the time investigators arrive, Charlie will be so desperate to sell that he'll accept any offer. Farmers always cave when they lose a crop." They were committing felony arson while discussing real estate fraud, documenting their own criminal conspiracy in admissible detail. At 11:52 p.m., Brenda flicked her lighter. The corn ignited instantly, accelerant-fueled flames racing along the pre-soaked line like liquid fire. Within seconds, the blaze was visible from space, orange light dancing against the night sky like some hellish celebration. That's when my thermal cameras triggered automatic alerts to fire dispatch, sheriff's department, and my personal phone simultaneously. I'd programmed the system to send GPS coordinates, live video feeds, and emergency response codes the moment unusual heat was detected. Fire trucks were rolling within 90 seconds record response time that caught Brenda completely off guard. I watched her panic as sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer by the second. She and Paulson tried to flee, but their escape route led directly past responding emergency vehicles. The expression on Brenda's face when Fire Chief Morrison stepped out of the lead truck, illuminated by flames she'd set, was pure terror mixed with the dawning realization that she'd been caught red-handed committing arson. "Ma'am, step away from the fire line. You're under arrest." The crackling flames provided a fitting soundtrack to the end of Brenda Hartwell's criminal career. Game over. The irony was perfect. Brenda's arson happened on the same night as the monthly city council meeting, where half the town was gathered to discuss the proposed agricultural protection ordinance. She'd planned to use the meeting as her alibi, never imagining it would become the venue for her very public downfall. I was sitting in the back row of the packed council chambers when Fire Chief Morrison's radio crackled to life at 11:54 p.m. Code red, agricultural fire on Fieldstone property, multiple units responding, possible arson in progress. The room erupted. 30 people started talking at once, council members demanding updates, residents asking if their properties were threatened. Mayor Williams called for order, but you could smell the panic in the air like smoke. That's when Brenda Hartwell made her fatal mistake. She was sitting 3 rows ahead of me, and when Morrison's radio announced the fire, she turned around with this satisfied little smile like she was enjoying a private joke. For just a moment, her mask slipped completely, revealing the predator underneath. But her expression changed real quick when Morrison got his second radio update. "Chief, we've got the arsonists in custody. 2 suspects arrested at scene with accelerant containers. Fire contained to planned burn area." The blood drained from Brenda's face like someone had pulled a plug. She started gathering her purse, clearly planning to slip out before anyone connected her to the emergency. Too late. "Mrs. Hartwell," Morrison called out, his voice carrying across the silent chamber. "Mind staying put for a few minutes? Deputies are en route with some questions." You could have heard a pin drop. 40 pairs of eyes turned toward Brenda, who'd gone white as paper and started stammering about needing to check on her house. That's when I stood up and dropped the nuclear bomb that ended her criminal career forever. "Mr. Mayor, if I may address the council." My voice was steady, controlled, carrying the authority of someone who'd been preparing for this moment for weeks. "I have evidence relevant to tonight's arson that the community needs to hear." Mayor Williams nodded, recognizing me from years of town meetings. "The floor recognizes Charlie Fieldstone." I pulled out the folder containing months of documented evidence, Harold's recordings, surveillance footage, financial records proving Brenda's development conspiracy. The rustling papers sounded unnaturally loud in the dead silent chamber. "Ladies and gentlemen, what happened tonight wasn't random arson. It was the culmination of a 3-month criminal conspiracy designed to force me off my family's land for development profit." Brenda tried to interrupt, but Mayor Williams silenced her with a look that could freeze lava. I played Harold's recording first, Brenda's voice discussing the $2.8 million development deal, her borrowed commission money, her timeline pressures. Gasps echoed through the chamber as people realized they were hearing evidence of organized real estate fraud. "But here's the beautiful part," I continued, feeling the moment building like thunder before lightning. 3 weeks ago, I filed an agricultural conservation easement on my property. That land is now legally protected from development forever. The silence stretched like a held breath. Then, Harold stood up from his seat near the front. "I've been Brenda's inside source for months. he announced, his voice shaking but determined. Everything Charlie just said is true. She hired criminals to harass him, bribed neighbors for false testimony, and tonight she tried to burn down his crops to force a land sale. That's when Deputy Rodriguez walked through the chamber doors with backup officers, still smelling like smoke and looking grim as death. Brenda Hartwell, you're under arrest for felony arson, conspiracy to commit fraud, criminal harassment, and about 6 other charges we're still sorting through. He pulled out handcuffs while the entire town watched. You have the right to remain silent, though honestly you've already said plenty on tape. The room exploded into chaos. Council members demanding explanations, residents asking how they'd missed a criminal conspiracy happening in their neighborhood, reporters from the local paper frantically taking notes. But the real mic drop moment came when Jake Thornfield stepped forward with a folder thick as a phone book. For the record, Mrs. Hartwell, you're also facing federal RICO charges, civil damages in excess of $500,000, and permanent disbarment from real estate practice in Ohio. His predatory lawyer smile was beautiful to behold. Your development deal is void, your commission is forfeited, and your assets are frozen, pending investigation. Brenda's legs gave out. She collapsed into her chair like a deflated balloon, the reality of her situation finally hitting home. No development deal, no commission, no future, just criminal charges and financial ruin. As Rodriguez led her out in handcuffs, she passed right by my seat. For a moment, our eyes met, and I saw something I'd never expected. Genuine fear mixed with the dawning realization that she'd destroyed her own life for money she'd never see. Should have stuck to selling houses, Brenda, I said quietly as she passed. The last thing I heard before the chamber doors closed was her sobbing. Justice served, with the whole town as witnesses. 6 months later, I'm standing in my cornfield watching Sarah and Emma help with spring planting, and the transformation still takes my breath away. Not just the land, but everything this fight changed about who we are as a family. The legal carnage was beautiful to watch. Brenda pleaded guilty to felony arson, conspiracy, and real estate fraud, 2 years in prison, $50,000 in restitution, and a criminal record that'll follow her forever. Her private investigator, Rick Paulson, got 18 months and lost his license permanently. Midwest Development Corporation paid $75,000 to avoid federal prosecution, basically admitting they orchestrated the whole harassment campaign. But the real victory wasn't money. It was watching my daughters' faces when I told them college was fully funded. Insurance payouts plus lawsuit settlements meant Sarah could pursue veterinary school and Emma could study engineering without a penny of debt. Sometimes justice comes with compound interest. The sweet scent of fresh soil fills the morning air as I watch Emma operating grandfather's 1960 John Deere, learning techniques that built this land through 3 generations. Last week she announced she's double majoring in agricultural engineering. Someone needs to help family farmers fight these corporate bullies, Dad. Denise finished paralegal certification in January and now works with Jake Thornfield, specializing in agricultural defense cases. Our battle inspired something bigger. She's helped 12 farming families defeat similar harassment campaigns statewide. Knowledge is power, she says, but applied knowledge is revolution. Harold became our unlikely hero after testifying against Brenda's conspiracy. He volunteers with the county extension office now, teaching seniors about agricultural heritage and fraud recognition. 40 years of postal service taught me patterns, he grins. Turns out predators always make the same mistakes. The community transformation has been incredible. Our case triggered the Fieldstone Agricultural Protection Act, state legislation, making farmer harassment a felony that's already being copied nationwide. Property rights advocates use our story as a blueprint for fighting development corruption. But I'm proudest of the Family Farm Defense Fund scholarship we established with settlement money. Every year, we provide full college tuition for students studying agricultural law, environmental protection, or sustainable farming. This year's recipients include a ranch daughter fighting mining companies and an organic farmer who survived suburban encroachment. Our Heritage Harvest Festival has become an annual celebration of agricultural history, drawing 5,000 visitors and generating serious revenue for local businesses. State legislators used last fall's event to announce expanded farm protection funding, proof that heritage tourism beats strip mall development every time. The conservation easement sparked a county movement. 17 families have protected over 300 acres from development, reducing property taxes 60% while preserving agricultural character permanently. Economic sustainability and land conservation aren't opposites, they're partners. Last month brought the sweetest revenge. Midwest Development Corporation filed bankruptcy after 3 more harassment schemes were exposed using our legal playbook. Their predatory business model collapsed once farming communities learned to fight back systematically. Walking through corn rows now, listening to new growth rustling and my daughters laughing as they work, I realized this story was never about Brenda Hartwell. It was about ordinary people refusing to let money-hungry bullies destroy something beautiful for profit. The rough bark of grandfather's oak tree feels eternal under my palm as evening light paints golden across fields that will never be subdivisions, never be strip malls, never be anything but what they've always been. Good land growing food for families who understand what really matters. Emma calls from the tractor, waving as she turns another perfect furrow. Sarah's over by the barn, bottle feeding a calf that'll grow up grazing pastures that stay pastures forever. Denise is on the porch, reviewing case files for another farming family under attack 3 counties over. This is what victory looks like. Not just winning a legal battle, but creating something bigger than the fight itself. Community, legacy, hope. The evening air carries the scent of corn pollen and possibility, reminding me that some things are worth fighting for, worth bleeding for, worth risking everything to protect. Family land, honest work, the right to live without fear of suburban parasites who mistake greed for progress. Sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to let the bastards destroy what matters most. Share your own HOA nightmare story in the comments. Let's expose these suburban tyrants together and help more families fight back against development corruption. Subscribe to HOA Stories and hit that notification bell for more tales about ordinary people beating corrupt systems. Because when good people stand together, even the greediest predators learn to respect the power of community. Next week, how a retired teacher used a 200-year-old property deed to shut down a luxury resort, stealing her lake access, and why the developers are still paying her rent.
That's all for today's HOA Madness. If watching justice serve itself made your day, smash that like button, share your thoughts down below, and make sure you're subscribed. More outrageous neighborhood showdowns are just around the corner.